I believe that the United States and China can have a win-win relationship. Absolutely. Where the American people basically are better off and the Chinese people are better off. So that is the end goal of my writing. I think it can be done. But of course, it can only be done if you, number one, treat China with respect. You know, America is the only country in the world, I think, whose leaders insult China.
In what ways?
I tell you, no Asian country insults China.
What do we say that insults China?
You just have to read the speech that Mike Pompeo gave at the Nixon Library, I think on some anniversary of Kissinger's visit in 2021. And you can see the sort of speeches he gave, 2020. I mean, those sorts of speeches, the condescension, the idea that we're going to liberate the Chinese people, that the Chinese government is illegitimate, that the Chinese government is repressive,
Yeah.
And all these things. And the point is, if you really want to engage in a geopolitical contest, and I've been studying geopolitics for over 50 years, since 1971, the first rule of geopolitics is know thine enemy. Know thyself. Fight 1,000 battles, win 1,000 battles. And if you completely misunderstand China and you don't understand what its strengths and weaknesses are, then you will lose the fight.
Yeah.
And the Chinese, this is the biggest advantage the Chinese have over the United States of America. The Chinese leaders think long-term and have a long-term strategy for managing the United States of America. The United States, and as I say in my book, this was told to me, the conversation I had with Henry Kissinger, the United States doesn't have a long-term strategy. If you ask any person in the administration, what are you trying to achieve? What is your goal? Let me give you three hypothetical examples. Overthrow the Chinese Communist Party. Cannot be done. Isolate China. Cannot be done. Stop the Chinese economy from becoming number one. Cannot be done. So what are your objectives? So you have to learn to live with realities. That's what geopolitics is about. And the United States of America can remain the most admired society in the world even after China becomes the number one economy. Now, that's a possible goal. That's a realistic goal. And that's what United States should try to do.
You're saying that America's national interest lies to some considerable extent in just trying to become an admirable society, as it long has been, but not so much recently, I think. I mean, now that almost suggests to me that the answer to my original question is that in terms of actual competition with China in a more material sense than that, like competing over Taiwan or competing over the Belt and Road Initiative, right? Like feeling threatened by the Belt and Road Initiative, or for that matter, the issue of the South China Sea, navigation rights, or various islands belong to in the South China Sea or the East China Sea. I mean, are you saying those are not? Are none of those areas that an American president focused on national interests should be concerned about?
I'm glad you used the word national interests, because the first thing you need to do when you engage in a geopolitical competition, like the one the United States has launched against China, there's no question whatsoever that the United States has launched a geopolitical contest against China. No question. The trade tariffs, the efforts to set up the Quad, the AUKUS, all these are actions against China.
The Quad being this group of countries, India, Japan, Australia, and the U.S., right?
Exactly.
Right.
They're all and move to sort of, in some way or another, constrain China. But of all the issues that you mentioned, the most dangerous issue in U.S. China relations is Taiwan. Because if there's one issue that can actually lead to war between the United States and China, it is Taiwan, because there's absolutely no question, and let there be no doubts about this, if Taiwan declares independence and says it wants to become an independent country, China will declare war. It's 100% certainty, and everyone in Asia knows this. So the best thing we can do is keep the status quo, which preserved autonomy for Taiwan, and that way you avoid a war. South China Sea, there'll be no war. Absolutely,
you're sure
no
of that?
Because you know, the United States says its primary interest is to protect freedom of navigation in South China Sea. Now, the United States, as you know, is not a claimant to any territories in the South China Sea. If there's going to be a war, it could be a war between China and the Philippines, or China and Vietnam, or China and Malaysia, which is unlikely, by the way, and I'll explain why. But in the case of the United States, it says that it has an interest in freedom of navigation. And guess what? The country that has a greater interest than the United States in freedom of navigation is China. Because China trades more with the world than the United States does. So when the United States Navy keeps international waterways open, it is doing China a massive favor.
Although
the Chinese actually...
There is an issue over the South China Sea that was taken to an international tribunal, right? And China lost, I gather. And I thought that was about, and did not respect the ruling, as I understand it. And I thought that was about something about navigation. That wasn't about the islands, right?
It was about, I don't think it's an island per se. It's a feature, I think. And the Philippines won the case. Right. And China is not going to respect it. But as you know, most great powers violate international law some of the time, not all the time. And as you know, the United States has a base in Diego Garcia, which the ICJ has declared that the British ownership of the base is illegal and it should be returned to Mauritius. And neither United States nor UK are going to abide by the World Court ruling. It's not surprising. That's how great powers behave. And so China will not abide by the ruling, but China is engaged in intense private discussions with the Philippines to try and find a solution.
Okay.
And that's a problem not between the United States and China. It's a problem between Philippines and China.
Okay. So there's no real issue with freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. It exists, and China is not challenging it.
China would lose more if there's no freedom of navigation. Right.
So, okay. And as for Taiwan, it sounds to me like you're saying the less America talks about it, the better, because I've had the impression that China would just as soon live with the status quo for quite some time. I mean, its official policy is eventual reconciliation of Taiwan, integration of Taiwan. It would say back into China. It considers Taiwan to have always been part of China. But I don't think they want to invade Taiwan. And I've wondered whether the amount of rhetorical attention the United States pays to Taiwan increases the chances of war, makes it harder, just arouses various forces that could cause trouble. Is that your view, that the less America talks about it, the less likely war will be?
Well, the one lesson of geopolitics is that when great powers raise human rights issues, it is only brought up when it is a convenient geopolitical weapon. So in 1971, when Kissinger went to China, and in 1972, when Nixon went to China, China was in the middle of the Cultural Revolution. The human rights abuses in China under the Cultural Revolution were off the scale. What did the United States do? It didn't see any of it. In fact, for all the years in which the United States collaborated with China, and it collaborated to the extent of putting up CIA listening stations in Xinjiang, by the way, to against the Soviet Union. So today, when the United States expresses concern over Taiwan, to be honest with you, it's not because the United States cares about the people of Taiwan. It's because it's a convenient geopolitical issue to use against China and to say that China is threatening democracy. So that's, I don't want to be too cynical, but if tomorrow the United States suddenly decided that China is very important, there's an asteroid coming down, going to hit planet Earth, and the only two countries that can fob it off is United States and China, Taiwan will disappear from the radar.
Right.
So it's all about what your interests are. And I actually think that the United States can find a better way of competing with China and not resort to this, trying to pinch China on small issues. It's much more important to work out a comprehensive, long-term strategy which says, hey, for the United States, these are my fundamental long-term interests, right? And these are your fundamental long-term interests. How do we work together?
Okay.
And we have to disagree on some issues, and there will be disagreements on some issues. How do we manage the disagreements? Because at the end of the day, it's very clear that the final solution cannot be a war. Because if you do have a war, I don't know which city you're in, but LA will disappear, San Francisco will disappear, New York City will disappear. And that's not worth anything, right? A nuclear war. So there are some issues that can trigger a nuclear war, and we want to stay clear of that.
Let's stick a little bit with the human rights thing, because you brought it up. And first of all, it's interesting. You brought it up with respect to Taiwan, and that's interesting because China would almost naturally consider our objections over Taiwan to be kind of in the realm of human rights because it considers Taiwan part of China. There are people in America who think of the China-Taiwan issue as comparable to the Russia-Ukraine issue in the sense that they think of it as a sovereign country. Now, and we've already talked about the fact that that's just not China's perception. Another issue, though, the biggest issue probably that comes up in the realm of human rights in the American conversation is, of course, the situation with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. What I assume that that's one of the things that the Chinese leadership and maybe many of the Chinese people don't want to be lectured about by the United States. How do they perceive that? Is it that they just frame the whole issue otherwise, or they think we don't understand why they've resorted to what they're doing, or do they think we're exaggerating what they're doing, or what? Do you have any sense for what the Chinese perception of the Uyghur situation is?
Well, the Chinese perception of the Uyghur situation is that the United States, when it was attacked after 9/11, decided to respond partly as an act of revenge, partly as an act of deterrence by invading Afghanistan and then invading Iraq, right? And it was seen as a retaliation against the 9/11 attack. The Chinese were subject to similar attacks from Uyghur separatists and so on and so forth. So when I was in Shanghai, I was told China also had its 9/11 moment. And that's when China decided to say, this will stop. This won't happen. And what's interesting is that the Americans say that the Chinese are not respecting the rights of Muslims in Xinjiang. Now, when the United States in the Cold War accused the Soviet Union of suppressing the Muslims in Afghanistan, the Muslim world agreed with the Soviet Union and supported the United States. Today, when the United States says that China is suppressing the Muslims of Xinjiang, not one Muslim government has agreed with the United States. And this is, we have a very strange situation in the world. Again, future historians will remark on this. that you have a bunch of Christian countries going to the UN expressing concern over the Muslims in Xinjiang, and 37 countries or 39 countries, including mostly Muslim countries, saying we understand what China is doing.